Good morning. Good
All right.
morning. How are you, sir?
Good.
Very good, very good. Well, we'll just wait for the crowds to hoard in to our opening session. Hello there, Teresa. How has your evening been? How's it you? Or your morning?
Yeah, it has been good. Well, I just got up, so it cannot be any worse. And nothing happened.
Fair enough, fair enough.
All right.
Well,
How was your morning?
it was excellent. It was excellent. I stayed up till about half two, doing work, helping sort stuff out for today, coordinating various things on the Slack channels, and yeah, taking it from there really. Then now we are here, the official launch.
All right. Yeah, we had a couple hours of team meeting yesterday. You see, it's whenever you do this kind of like hackathon, you have unknown team members, different ideas, and trying to sort of coalesce around central themes, and so very good meeting we had. So, meeting, yeah, lasted over 2 hours. So
great. Well, I mean, there's so many exciting ideas. So let's begin the kickoff, and then Youngjin, I can hand it over for your remarks. So firstly, I see there's a few attendees that have come into the meeting. Hello, good morning to you wherever you are. If it is morning, evening, or afternoon for our incredibly distributed global hackathon. It's a pleasure to welcome you here. So my name, for those who couldn't make our 12 BST kickoff last night, is James Kingston. I'm Deputy Director of the Hat Lab. I'm one of the main organizers of this event. It's great to have you with us. We started pulling everything together about 2.5 weeks ago in response to the global crisis as an attempt to provide a way for people to contribute their skills and their knowledge and their energy to the fight against the spread and the social effects of COVID-19, the latter of which, of course, is only really going to bite more as economies begin to falter and vulnerable people begin to suffer. We've also put together this hackathon to highlight that in the fight against the pandemic and the many stresses and tensions that it brings, the freedom of the individual and their control of their personal data can still be upheld. It is not necessarily a trade-off between protecting individuals and societies and personal privacy and personal control of your data. We think there's another way, and that actually applications and tools can be built which respect both and which actually create a vision of what we might call a form of civic technology. Civic technology that now allows individuals and communities to participate in the public sphere and in relation to the state in ways that will continue to undergird and protect democracies as we move forward into the future years of this century. And I think that's an incredibly important point. One of the great things about this hackathon is quite how global it is. So you'll be hearing updates as these couple of days progress from figures from right the way around the world. We'll be hearing insights about how different societies have been coping with the pandemic, the varying responses. Obviously, China being one, Korea's had another model. Taiwan too has been underreported, but actually quite fascinating in its particular approach. And then, of course, those in the major European states, not to mention, of course, the US and the particular path it's been cutting so far. We'll be having speakers with a whole range of expertise from senior experts in public health through to tech ethics specialists, which I think will be a really interesting one, the data ethics canvas that we'll be having later this afternoon. We'll be having experts in the Internet of Things and differential privacy coming to address us. Investors from IQ Capital being the key one, as well as then sociologists and anthropologists. So a real mix of people here to help you, well, firstly, just learn more about the pandemic and its effects, but also, really to be considered as inputs into your projects. Because of course, we must always remember, technology is never divorced from the society in which it arises. It's always part of a socio-technical cultural system. And so if you want to build truly responsible, ethical technology, you have to consider the whole space, the quantitative, the qualitative, the cultural space within which whatever artifactual system you wish to create will operate. And that's really key to our vision. We here across the Hat Lab organization and the broader Hat ecosystem, with our particular emphasis on personal data accounts and providing ownership and legal control to individuals of their data. Ethics is key to our vision for technology. We're all about an internet and a world where people can control their own data and are empowered through their control of their own data. And we think this is even more important now than ever. We mustn't forget it in the rush to respond to this crisis. Now, I'll be your host throughout the day, so you'll be hearing a lot from me, as will my flatmates, who are, of course, trapped in isolation with me, just secluding themselves in the other side of the house for the time being. They have a great deal of patience. Without any further ado, I would like to cede the floor to Professor Youngjin Yoo of Case Western Reserve University, who's been our primary partner in the hackathon, an absolutely invaluable contributor of insights, knowledge, and raw energy to this enterprise, and many other things besides. So Youngjin, I shall stop speaking and pass it over. And Youngjin, you appear to be muted.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
yeah,
right.
Right.
That was me there. Right, okay.
Well, thank you for James, the introduction, and first of all, thank you for really mobilizing, for this hackathon. You and your colleagues from Head Lab and Ethical Technology Alliance and DataShift just were wonderful, in mobilizing in such a short period of time. Just as a short background, how Western Reserve University became one of the main partners in these efforts, global efforts with Head Lab. Irene, from whom you will hear soon, and James and Sean were visiting Case Western Reserve University just a few weeks ago. It feels like it was, millennials ago, given the amount of things that are happening ever since. Case Western Reserve University became very interested in, building a partnership with the Head Lab to build a, Head Lab USA in the USA. We basically agreed to explore the agreements and looking for ways to collaborate. Then the pandemic really became the really big issues, and then all of us could not travel, have the travel that we planned to have, and this hackathon just came up and sounds like a really great way to collaborate and build a further relationship between the two groups. So that's how we ended up partnering with Head Lab Group. And I'd like to just, very quickly share some of my thoughts and why I believe personally that this is so important for us to work together. As we see, this is a global crisis, and everyone is responding to this crisis in a particular way as they see needed. And I think there is a great danger in responding to these crisis in a rushed way, because crisis of this magnitude will certainly create a everlasting, a permanent change in the society. One danger is overreacting in a way that that will create further damage in the future in the society. So for example, right now everyone is rushing to build more capacity in the hospital and the ventilators and all of that. What we're dealing with is peak capacity. So, the one of the projects that are being proposed was how do you deal with peak capacity for hospitals as power utility companies are dealing with peak capacities, right? But it will be a mistake that we build our health system based on the surge, the peak of the surge, and then it will be a huge in a way waste of resource during the normal time. And we hope that this pandemic, this kind of pandemic will not repeat itself all the times. It is almost certain that some similar pandemic will happen again. The virus will continue to mutate, and then we'll have to prepare for the future. But it is not the right reaction to overbuild the capacity. Another the risk is that we underreact and then thinking that this is just crisis. So whatever we do is we'll go back to the normal. And one of such potential risk is for us relaxing the concerns around privacy issues. So as we have seen from many reports, governments around the world are attempting or already collecting very personal data and trying to do good things in a way, right? So it's these nation states are trying to collect personal data in order to track the disease diffusion and trying to isolate those patients and trying to go after certain areas where they need to isolate, they need to test, and with some success. At the same time, we see the risk of people hiding from these tracking, the disease tracking, because in some cases their personal information is revealed. There's some sort of like a public shaming taking place. People, being infected can carry certain kind of social stigma. So people don't come forward in sharing their symptoms and then hiding away from the public instead of actively, voluntarily sharing the symptoms so that we can actually track where the disease is going. So I think that, privacy issue and then, properly handling personal data is not simply an ethical issue, but also it has a hugely pragmatic issue. If we do not do it right, we will actually create huge inefficiency in the system. I teach, in the business school. So, creating a system that actually does work, creating a system that actually, being effective is an important, topic that we should think about. So creating an ethical, civic technology infrastructure, which will mobilize individuals to participate in this collective actions fighting against this kind of pandemic, the current one and the future one, is extremely important. Now with that, I'd like to reflect on a couple different sort of trends I think that is being discussed among scholars and journalists, and then kind of like put this whole hackathon in that perspective and why I think this is an important efforts. Something like this really needs to be taking place so that we can inform and enable public to take important role in this future shaping sort of activities. We have seen the growth in the power of or the reversal of the globalization and global integration over the last few years. All the political systems in each nations are, pulling each countries in the opposite direction where, from the global integration. Much of our social systems, much of our economic systems are designed and built with an assumption as if this global trend will continue. But the consequence of the globalization has created unintended consequences in a social economic sense in each of the nations. And the rise of the social media connecting those who didn't get the benefit from the global integration are now creating important political power, and that led to the
the disintegration force from a global economic sense. That is going to only accelerate as a result of this pandemic. What we have seen is that the global integration is pretty powerless in response to the massive global pandemic. It is each nations who are stepping up and responding to this crisis. It is the German government, not European Union, who could really step in. It is each nation state who are actually taking a bigger role. Now, I'm not making a judgment whether this is good or bad, but this is a fact. So this will influence the way things will be going forward. So that's the fact number one that I think we should be thinking about. Number two, it is inevitable that we will rely more on virtual setting, like hackathon, like we do. There will be less of a physical movement of the people. Trade will be, there will be more national production of products and goods and services. And then whatever that is left will be relying on digital means and the university education and then commerce, and whether it is domestic or global, it'll be relying on digital technology. Now, when we put these two trends together, the privacy, personal data on the digital realm is becoming extremely important, because you are going to see a nation state gaining political legitimacy of consolidating power over individuals because they have responded, or they had to respond to the crisis, mobilizing their own power within their jurisdiction. So the public will think that it is okay for the nations to invade my privacy because it was necessary. And then more and more of our activities will move to the virtual space. So there will be even more danger that our lives will be surveilled, not just by Google and Facebook. It would look pale compared to what can happen when nation state take over the surveillance capitalism. It is going to be like 10 times worse than Facebook or Google knows about where I am at and so on, if indeed that can actually take place. So I think these are the two sort of backdrop of what we are working on now. And then, we have to begin to think about what's going to happen once this crisis is over, once we go back to our daily routines and going to the bars and going to work and going to church and going to a friend's house and trying to have our normal life. What's going to happen from there? And some of the underlying foundations, the very fabric of our society and our daily lives will change. And in a very subtle way, and without noticing that we're going to live in a very different sort of world. So this is why I think it is incredibly important that to demonstrate that we do not need a big state taking over our privacy in order for us to respond to this kind of a crisis. And we actually show and demonstrate that it is we will be able to actually create a better response, more local, more agile, more smart, more targeted response in this kind of crisis, if we in fact enable individuals so that they could take charge of their own lives. They can mobilize personal resources that they have. And I think it is extremely important. And one thing that I'm particularly excited about working with Head Lab and Data Swift, and then with this particular hackathon, is that oftentimes when we talk about privacy, it is we are talking about it from the perspective of protection, and then what we will end up having, if that is the only thing we talk about, is a digital version of lockdown. We are all, all of us will hold on to our own personal data. All of us will essentially be frozen in our own little container without sharing any of our private lives. And because, like I said, more and more activities will be taking place on the digital realm, if we only think about protection of personal data, we're going to have a lockdown, the digital version of lockdown, and then we'll be isolated, we'll be lonely, we will not be able to take advantage of digital technology in the economic realm. So it is inevitable that we have to create a mechanism by which the data can flow and move in order for us to enjoy our lives, whether it is virtual or physical. And having a technological foundation that not only protects but allows us to share data, I think is extremely important. So and I think some of these the challenges that our teams are trying to address through this hackathon is exactly trying to figure out how we could, while protecting our privacies and dignity from each individual's perspective, yet at the same time mobilize such data in such a way so that we can actually create a collective goods in response to this kind of a crisis. So in a way, I think what we're trying to do is also a grand scale experiment, participating in this inevitable evolution of civilization and open society, and try to figure out a way to create some kind of solution. And hopefully some of the solutions that we create will challenge and inspire others to respond with their own solutions. Because I don't think this hackathon is the only collective efforts to create, smart, intelligent, civic solutions. But hopefully this will be part of the larger solution. This will be one of the mutations of our society, civic, DNA. And then out of that, more robust, response to this challenge that we have to deal with. And so from that perspective, I think this is incredibly exciting and, positive, a response that come out of this global terrible pandemic. And I'm really glad to be part of it. And thanks, give thanks to James and his colleague who have organized this event. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Yoo. That's a really interesting talk. It was really interesting hearing your points on the kind of digital space remaining highly globalized in some senses, but there being a decoupling of the material goods and services. I think from my side, one of the really interesting, exciting things about this hackathon in general is this whole narrative of empowerment. Firstly, people are being empowered to come together and collaborate with teams from all over the world, and that's important in and of itself. But then there's this sort of digital empowerment, which you're referring to. People, not just in lockdown, have been able to flow data, but in ways that they control. And that, of course, is one of the really interesting things about what has obviously contributed to the Hat Lab's involvement in this, which is the Hat Personal Data Account architecture, which enables individuals to have a digital space that they own and control, and which enables them to participate, in a sense, in the civic internet for this civic technology, for they can have it's sort of almost in a sense a digital representation or a digital version of them as individuals with rights in a physical baseline setting. So I think it's really important there. I was very interested in your point on the legitimacy of states and I guess the weakening of international institutions. I was chatting with some friends of mine, financial traders, who were giving me some somewhat downbeat predictions about some of the more famous international institutions like the European Union. Would you see the collapsing of some of the major international institutions in the years ahead, or it's more that you just believe that there'll be a greater locus of authority in nation states?
I think for the moment, unless we come up with a really strong response to not just this particular pandemic, but the political, economic, political, social crisis that we are seeing each of these countries, I think we will inevitably see. This is really the combination of the rise of social media connecting the people, and then inequality that came out of the global integration. These two combination really led to, I think, the political discourse in each of the nations and then that led to this isolationist, movement, the populist movement, against the global integration. And I think there is a certain, I'm very sympathetic to such concerns, but the isolation is not the right response. So the challenge is for those who are interested in continuing the benefit of global integration and the technology and so on, is how do you design a system that that does not continue to isolate individuals who contributed to the rise of this like a global integration at the local level. And I think there's a lot of work to do, and I think that is extremely important issues. And then I think, quite frankly, the post World War II, the 70, 80 years of world order was a very peculiar moment in history. After the end of the war, the Europe and U.S. and then European allies decided to create a very peculiar kind of like a global system that really wasn't didn't exist before. So we shouldn't think that that is going to be continue to be the norm. There is no reason. From a long historical view, I know that you study history, so that's not something that we should assume to be the case. That, and then very quickly, if I may, when I think about this whole participation, the civic participation with their own data. I think it's a new form of civic duty. We could, if we think about, almost like, you're expected to vote, in order to participate in, political discourse. So when something like this happens, I envision, where we could build a technology infrastructure where individuals might be called to share certain type of data with a proper protection provided, so that their mobility data and then financial transactions over the last 5 days, during the incubation period, is being pooled. And you are expected, not being pressured, not being required, but it is like a civic duty that you participated in that creation of such a response to the pandemic, so that the public can be informed about where the virus is. I think that's a different kind of civic participation that can arise when people feel empowered and enabled to own their own data. Right now, you cannot give what you do not have, but once you give it to them, and then they feel like they actually own it, and now it is their duty to share it. So how do you create that? It's not just a rhetoric, but creating a technology infrastructure so that people can be actually enabled to do so. I think it is extremely important, and I hope that we will see some of those underlying design patterns and design principles come out from this hackathon.
So, well, thank you very much, Professor.
Well, thank you.
If you have some time after this talk, it'd be great if you have a moment to join the Ask Me Anything channel on Slack. I know you've been active on Slack chat there, and I invite anyone who wants to speak to Professor Yoo either directly after this talk or more generally, for he is floating in and out of the overall hackathon channels, to drop a message and take it from there, because that was definitely some fascinating reflections.